Chapter 18, The Family Tree. The scene changed quickly in response to their synchronized breathing and intense concentration. The honest conversation had focused their attention quickly. When they opened their eyes, they were standing in front of a huge tree in a field of long grass that stretched to the horizon. The tree towered majestically 200 meters above them, filling the entire sky. Its branches reached out in all directions. "It's beautiful," said Solomon, leaning his head back to take in the monolith in front of them. He loved the stability and grandeur of trees. The bark of the trunk was broken and scaly, like patched, dry, old skin. The major branches were like small trees themselves. They extended outwards, each a mother to multiple children that held tight while reaching out to explore the world. The leaves were so dense it was impossible to see the end of each branch, and together the leaves formed a canopy high above the trunk. Whistling sounds revealed a community of birds and possibly an entire world of other beings living inside the leafy oasis. As they stood staring upwards, the outline of a doorway, barely visible at first, began to form in the base of the trunk. Slowly it peeled itself away from the trunk and opened with a creaking sound to reveal a dark cavity within. Mei Ling gasped and stepped back. "I think we're supposed to go in," said Emily. As she spoke, the trunk began lifting slowly into the air, pulling the roots of the tree with it. A groaning suction sound reverberated around them as one by one the giant tendrils sprang free from the earth. As the tree lifted further, a ladder descended from the open doorway. Several of the largest branches reached down and rooted themselves, stabilizing the tree as it wrenched itself upwards. "Hey, we're surrounded," Solomon yelled as he turned to see the roots form into a wall that encircled them. The trunk continued to lift, taking the doorway and the now fully descended ladder with it. "Let's go," said Raj, lurching toward the trunk. One after another, they climbed the ladder and ascended into the darkness of the tree trunk. Raj discovered he had reached the top of the ladder when his climbing turned to walking. He stopped in the dark, hesitant to step forward too quickly. A door opened, and he looked beyond it to see a desert. He could just see the outline of forms that looked like camels wandering in the distance. A group of travelers was crossing the sand in front of him. "Where are we?" he asked. It took a moment for the lack of response to register as he stared at the foreign landscape. He had come to expect a quick reply from one of the others, but when he turned to see where they were, he discovered he was alone. "Guys, are you coming?" His shouts drifted unheard into the open space of the desert. The sand shifted in front of him, swirling into shapes that changed as quickly as they formed. He watched, mesmerized, wondering how people could find their way in the desert when there was no stationary landmarks. Then he noticed the shifting sands were creating images. He shook his head, wondering if he was hallucinating. "I haven't been here long enough to be affected by the heat," he thought. He stood still, adjusting his eyes to the glare of the sun, trying to focus so he could discern the images. In quick succession, he saw a series of images flash in front of him, as if the desert had turned into a giant movie screen. First, he saw the image of a man walking, staff in hand. Then he saw a great and mighty sea parting in the middle and creating a pathway. Then he saw a burning bush, the fire leaving everything around it untouched. And finally, he saw a man holding heavy tablets of stone. The images passed in front of his eyes as mirages in the desert. He felt no personal connection to them, but he knew they represented stories from the Jewish religion. He felt the presence of someone standing beside him. "Are you all right?" a male voice inquired. "You look a bit disoriented." I am a bit confused, said Raj, turning to look at the person beside him. The man was older than Raj, maybe in his mid-20s, with a neatly cropped beard and long black hair that was tucked behind his ears. He wore a dark-colored desert kaftan that was cinched around his waist, with a wide red cotton belt. When Raj looked into the eyes of the young man, he felt a surge of recognition. Time stopped as he stood staring, trying to identify the eyes. Then it struck him. They were Emily's eyes. "Oh, now I'm even more confused," he said, grappling to understand what he was seeing. "I knew you would recognize me," said the man with Emily's eyes. "We have been friends many times, you and I. That's why we feel we can speak with such authority about each other's character flaws." Raj couldn't deny the deep feeling that he knew this person well, that it was Emily. Still, it was a bit creepy to be speaking to Emily in his mind and to a young Middle Eastern man in reality. "Where am I? What's this all about?" asked Raj. "I've been seeing things that make no sense to me, images from the Jewish religion." "How could you know of Judaism?" asked the young man, looking closely at Raj as he awaited an answer. "We had to study the religious diversity of India, and one of the groups we studied were the Cochin Jews of the South, but I have no connection to them, so why am I here?" "We were once here together, you and I," the man said. "You were equally confused at that time. I was passionate about the new religion. I loved the clarity and simplicity of Abraham's message, that there is only one God, and that we were to stop worshiping the multiple idol figures we prayed to." He looked at Raj to measure his reaction to this information. Raj stared into the distance, looking for something that wasn't there. "But you loved the deity idols," continued the young man, "and it was difficult for you to give them up. You felt that you would be abandoning God's expression if you abandoned the deities. For this reason, you would not accept the new religion." Raj turned to look at the young man, a memory tickling inside him. Without a clear image, the memory remained a vague, formless feeling. "We parted ways then, you and I." Emily's eyes searched Raj's for recognition. "After that, I followed the new religion for many years, many lifetimes. We didn't meet again until much later, under different circumstances." "I see," Raj said, not fully understanding, but intrigued to know more. "I can relate to some of what you're saying. It seems silly to me that we bow down and worship stone idols, but I still feel that God is connected to them somehow. I can't let them go." "It's okay. It has been an issue for you for a long time. You have always loved your religion. I didn't respect you for it when we were together during this time. I thought you were a pagan, unsophisticated and backwards, and I'm sorry that I judged you so harshly. I hope you can forgive me." The young man looked at Raj with such love in his eyes that Raj felt his heart melt. He could feel the truth of everything the man had said. He could also feel the depth of connection he had to this person, how comfortable he felt to speak of such deep matters. "So this is why Emily and I are comfortable challenging each other so openly," he thought. The idea made sense somehow. He thought back to the times when he had resisted Emily's opinions, even when he agreed with her. He had a feeling that by accepting this man's apology now, it would put something right between him and Emily. "Yes, I can forgive you," he said. "In fact, I can see how much you would have loved the simplicity of Abraham's message. It is what I admire most about you, your clarity and simplicity." "I'm sorry if I judged you also," said Raj, surprised to hear himself speaking with such humility. It was easier to speak to this young man than it would have been to say the same words to Emily. "Walk with me for a bit," said the young man. "I'll show you what happened to Abraham's message." Mei Ling's steps slowed as she climbed higher inside the tree trunk. She wasn't sure where she was going and was suddenly afraid. A door opened, and she looked beyond to see a tropical forest filled with lush, flowering trees, vines, and a waterfall that cascaded from a rock cliff in front of her. The air felt like the inside of a sauna. Her forehead was suddenly sticky and her hair hung limp with the humidity. Turning to take in her surroundings, she saw a golden statue of the Buddha lying in the jungle off to her right. She recognized the statue as one of the many she had seen as a child in her home country. Vietnam was full of statues of the Buddha, reclining, standing, or sitting. Each image showed a face of such sublime contentment, it inspired people to seek contentment by following the Buddha's example. She looked behind her for the others, but they were nowhere to be seen. She was alone. Then she saw a little girl bent over the stream near the Buddha. She was washing a handful of flowers and placing each one gently at the Buddha's feet. "Hello," called Mei Ling. The girl looked around, confused, searching for the source of the voice. She obviously thought she would be undisturbed in her devotion. She smiled sweetly when she saw Mei Ling at a distance. Mei Ling had an odd feeling that she knew this girl. "Hi," she called again as she got closer. "My name's Mei Ling. What's yours?" The girl stared at her, then began speaking in a language Mei Ling did not understand. As the girl spoke, Mei Ling recognized many of the hand gestures Solomon used when speaking. As she continued to speak, the little girl reminded Mei Ling more and more of Solomon. She had the same quiet dignity and gentleness. Mei Ling kept smiling so as not to frighten the girl. As she got closer, she could see the fraying seams in the simple cotton frock the girl wore, and that her plastic flip-flop sandals were so worn down that her feet rested slightly off-center. Mei Ling could imagine the little girl running with the sandals sliding sideways under her feet. "I've always known about reincarnation," Mei Ling thought to herself, "but I never thought it could be like this." She stood in wonder for a moment before speaking. "Who are you?" she asked, knowing the girl would not understand. "Are you Solomon?" The little girl said nothing, but reached out her tiny hand. Mei Ling accepted it with a confused smile. The girl pulled her to sit on a stone in the middle of the stream. Mei Ling sat, grateful for the stability of the rock beneath her and the warm body beside her. The girl pointed her tiny finger up at the Buddha, directing Mei Ling's eyes to follow. As she looked into the Buddha's face, she felt herself relax. The girl smiled up at her, her face bright with the pleasure of Mei Ling's company. There was a kindness and a maturity in her eyes that comforted Mei Ling, the same way Solomon's presence did. The girl nodded her little head and pointed back up to the Buddha's face. They sat together in silence for a long time. As she settled onto the rock, surrounded by the soothing sounds of the stream, the sweet floral scent in the air, and the girl's warm hand clasping hers, Mei Ling's mind began to calm. She began to know things. She looked up at the smiling face of the Buddha and somehow understood that this girl was Solomon in another time, and that she was the mother of this girl. A flood of emotion washed over Mei Ling, and she felt a protective instinct toward the girl. She moved a bit closer to her, happy to be with her again. The little girl's eyes were deep pools of light. Her dark hair was pulled back flat on her head and held in a ponytail by a simple band decorated with a yellow flower. Mei Ling smiled. She imagined that even as a daughter, this young girl had been the wise one. She understood why she trusted Solomon from the first moment she had met him at school. She had recognized him as an old friend. Mei Ling understood that they had visited the forest many times together to see the Buddha. Suddenly, a crushing sadness threatened to suffocate her. Unexpectedly, tears began to well up in her eyes. She looked up at the half-closed eyes of the Buddha and understood that the girl had died of typhus. The horrible disease had robbed the life from her little body after leaving her weak and bedridden for weeks. The girl reached up to wipe away a teardrop as it fell over Mei Ling's nose. Mei Ling reached down to touch the little girl's cheek. They continued to sit, the girl leaning back against Mei Ling's chest. Mei Ling wrapped an arm around the slender body and held her close as they swayed and listened to the sounds of bird song and water splashing. When she gazed up at the Buddha, Mei Ling felt content. She understood that, although the girl had died, they would never be parted. They would continue to meet each other time and again over many lifetimes. This understanding brought her great comfort. She looked into the girl's eyes and made a quiet promise never to worry again. "Now what?" asked Mei Ling. "Is there more?" The girl pointed up to the Buddha's face, and Mei Ling settled into silence, awaiting new understanding. Solomon continued to climb inside the darkness of the tree trunk. It smelled of wet earth, and he wondered where they were going. Just as he was about to ask, he reached the top of the ladder. A door opened to reveal a vast expanse of land, covered with brown, dry grass, flattened as if swept by a continuous wind. He looked down and discovered he was standing on a rock outcropping, overlooking the plain in front of him. "Hey, guys," he called to his friends. Raj and Mei Ling had entered the tree before him. Now they were nowhere to be seen. Turning around, he discovered that Emily was no longer behind him. The plain in front of him was filled with men on horses. They rushed at each other, swords held high in the air, shrieking with vengeance. The air was heavy with the smell of sweat and anger. The screams were primal, like animals roaring against the bars of captivity. Solomon felt his skin crawl with fear and disgust as he saw weapons flash in the sun and heard the sickening thwack as sword met flesh. Who are these people? A queasy feeling arose in his stomach. What am I doing here? Where are my friends? A muffled cry escaped his lips. As he was wondering what to do, he heard a quiet, unfamiliar voice in his head. "It is all right. There is no need to fear." The voice was gentle and soothing. "You are witnessing a very important scene from history, one from which you may learn a great deal." "Who are you?" asked Solomon, turning to find the source of the voice. "I am known by many names. The man you are about to meet thinks of me as the angel Gabriel." Okay, now things have got really off the rails, Solomon thought to himself. Am I having a vision? Have I been drugged by this tree? What's going on? He asked aloud, feeling his usual calm dissolving and panic taking over. The scene in front of him began to change. A bearded man was now standing in the middle of the crowd. The warriors had dismounted from their horses and were gathered around him, their swords at their sides, no longer yelling. The man was speaking to the gathering. His natural authority captivated the warriors as though they were children. He stood tall and dignified, and he held the men's attention as he turned from one to another, speaking directly to each of them in turn. Solomon marveled at his gentle power and the way in which he reasoned with them. He assumed the man was convincing them to stop fighting. As the man spoke, two warriors broke from their respective groups and lurched towards each other, shaking fists and trying to out-yell each other. But they were quickly separated by the quiet mediator who held each man's arm. Solomon could almost see the heat between them as they stood waiting obediently. One man raised his fist, about to strike the other, when the mediator's commanding voice rang through the air. Instantly the arm dropped, as if unplugged from an energy source. Although Solomon could not hear the man's words, the lilting musical quality of his voice drifted toward him. Its firm, commanding tone urged the two warriors to listen. The men settled like animals surrendering to the alpha male, at least temporarily. It seemed highly improbable to Solomon that this reasonable man would succeed in stopping the barbaric fists from flying again. Then Solomon was standing closer to the scene, close enough to see the faces of the two men who had threatened each other. He was shocked to recognize himself in the eyes of one of the men. The eyes were unmistakably his, but somehow the body was that of an Arab man. He was transfixed by the anger and fierce pride he saw there. When he looked closely at the other man, he saw Rajah's eyes, filled with rage and pride in equal measure. "Oh God," Solomon muttered aloud, "is this why we are always fighting, Raj and I? Are we still angry over some ancient battle?" The thought both shocked and comforted him. Somehow it was easier to acknowledge his strong feelings if they had historical roots. At least he wasn't just making up the feelings that erupted in Rajah's presence. According to this scene, they had a reason for their animosity, even if it was just an old axe to grind. Solomon shook his head. "What is this all about?" he wondered. "This scene is of another time and place, far from anything I've ever lived. Why am I here, and how can Raj be here?" "You are witnessing the man who will become the prophet Muhammad," said the voice in his head. "This man in the middle, the mediator?" asked Solomon. "That's right," said Gabriel. "He is a man of great honor and diplomacy. He was well respected even before he played his part as God's messenger." "You're saying that this is the Prophet Muhammad?" said Solomon. "But no one is meant to know his face." "Yes, it is understood that God's message was shared by the angel Gabriel through the prophet's mouth, and that his face was never to be worshipped. The Holy Quran is a record of the words spoken directly through his mouth. It was important that he not be seen as God, as had happened with Jesus Christ," said Gabriel. "This new religion will bring much hope to the people of this land," Gabriel continued, "as well as great pride and self-respect. It is the first time that God has spoken to this people in their own language." Solomon stared at the scene before him, suddenly rich with new meaning. "So this is the start of Islam?" "Yes. Come, I will show you how it grows." "His eyes are so clear and pure and sweet. It's like falling into a deep pool of warm chocolate. I can see God in those eyes," Emily thought as she gazed, mesmerized, into the sparkling eyes of the bearded man in front of her. She knew in that moment that she would follow this man anywhere and do whatever he asked of her. He wasn't particularly tall or handsome or unique, but his eyes embraced her with an all-encompassing acceptance she had never experienced before. Although she wondered who he was, something about him reassured her that she would know when she needed to. When Emily had reached the top of the ladder inside the tree trunk, she passed through an open door that led her into this room, where she encountered these divine eyes. It was a place she recognized, just as she had recognized the man standing in front of her. She looked around the room to see what her friends were doing, but they were nowhere to be seen. In fact, there was no one in this room with her, except the man, and in the corner a woman, who sat quietly watching. The red dirt floor had been swept recently, the brush lines still freshly visible in the loosened dirt. The walls carried the same earthen color upwards from the floor to the underside of the roof, which was made of hard clay tiles in an interlocking wave pattern. The woman sat by an open fire, warming her hands and stirring something in a big earthenware pot. "Where am I?" Emily asked out loud, feeling the comfort of the cool air around her. The man looked at her quizzically, clearly not understanding her words. The woman also looked up, uncomprehending. Through the open door, Emily could see the street. She left the room, assuming she'd find Raj waiting outside, but he wasn't there. She looked in all directions and realized that neither Solomon nor Mei Ling was here with her. She was in a foreign place and time, alone. She began to walk along the street. It was lined with small, simple houses, built from the same red clay with the same rooftop tiles that undulated in a wave pattern. She recognized the architecture of the Middle East from movies and the pictures she had seen in sporadic childhood visits to Sunday school. That was Jesus, she thought. I know it. She remembered his eyes, so penetratingly kind. This is totally weird. What am I doing here? She continued to walk down the road until she came to an open doorway facing the street. She saw a family sitting together around a square wooden table, eating a meal. They appeared happy and peaceful. The man at the table looked up at her. She recognized him immediately, but didn't know how. He greeted her with a kind smile and gestured for her to enter and join them at the table. She hesitated, but then entered the room and sat in the chair that was offered. She felt a wave of kindness as each of the family members welcomed her with warm eyes. The mother offered her a bowl of food. It looked like yam and potatoes in a yellow liquid. She accepted the small earthenware bowl, like the one she had seen in the other house, with a carved wooden spoon. The woman's hand was soft and reassuring as it brushed lightly against Emily's outstretched fingers. They did not understand her words when she asked about this place. Smiling politely, she ate in silence, wondering why they would invite her in without knowing her. Then she remembered what she had learned about the first people who followed Christ's teachings. They lived with kindness as children of God. Charitable and welcoming, they shared what they had with strangers as though with kin. She sat with them in companionable silence, and they smiled openly at each other as they ate. After the meal, the father stood, bowed slightly to the mother and children, and gestured for Emily to follow him outside. She couldn't remember the last time she felt so quietly content, so unconditionally accepted. She followed him outdoors, and he led her away from the small gathering of houses on a road leading out of town. There was something familiar about him, but she couldn't quite place it. His gentleness, the sense of responsibility he carried with him, and the quiet sadness she saw in his eyes reminded her of someone. She realized with a start that this is what she saw in Mei Ling's eyes. Stopping to make sense of this, she turned to look at the man. His eyes found hers the way Mei Ling's did when they were with the boys, and she needed confirmation or reassurance. Then the scene changed, and she was sitting under the tree with her friends nearby. Emily looked at them. They were silent, each lost in thought. Raj caught her eye, and a smile spread across his face. "What's got you smiling?" Emily asked, still wondering what had happened. Raj's story about meeting Emily in another body prompted the others to tell their own stories. Afterwards, Raj asked Emily, "How did I know that was you?" "I don't know, but it explains a lot if we've known each other before," Emily said. "Apparently I was Jewish once." "I had no idea we had all of that inside us," Mei Ling said. "Can you believe I was a warrior at one point?" asked Solomon. "That explains a lot." Raj looked at Solomon with new eyes. "How can we possibly understand each other if we all have these amazing backstories?" Mei Ling asked. "It seems we meet each other at different times and in different places," said Solomon, "and each time we feel like we know each other, even if we can't remember the details." "Maybe when we really know someone, the details don't matter so much," said Emily. "Now I get what the diamond field was all about. We change bodies, but we stay the same inside." The family tree from the book turned out to be an actual tree. Solomon stared up in wonder at the leafy expanse of the tree above him. "The world's population grows like a tree branching out across the planet." "The book said that religions were meant to guide people when they lost their spiritual power," noted Raj. "Why is it important for us to know about the different religions?" Emily asked. They sat in silence for a moment, considering the question. "Really, the seed of all religions is the same," said Raj. "Be good, treat others well, live a virtuous life, and connect to a higher power." "Well, maybe that's a simple message we all need to live." Mei Ling liked this idea, but what does that have to do with regenerating the world? "My mom works in palliative care with people who are dying," said Emily. "Even though they know that everyone who comes into the unit will die, they take really good care of them. Maybe it's the same with Mother Nature. Maybe we have to take care of her while she goes through a death and regeneration. When a tree gets really big and it's ready to die, it drops a seed for a new sapling to grow, Solomon offered. The book said the new world would form around the seed of a new consciousness, remember, said Mei Ling. Maybe the religions have kept the seed alive? So we're waiting for the new tree to grow? Asked Raj, skeptical. Well, the book said a new sapling would grow from the compost of the world's decay, Mei Ling offered. And the Feather of Truth said we take the memories of our experiences with us, right? Said Emily. So maybe that's how we help regenerate the world, said Solomon. We take memories of our best selves with us. It's like we have to become the new sapling. He liked that idea. The tree above them disappeared, and the heat from the sun shone directly on their heads, no longer obscured by the massive foliage. Emily turned and saw a small sapling standing where the giant tree had been. Then the scene changed, and they were back in the library. In that instant, the earth rumbled.